In the 1970s, the Palestinian Resistance Movement was constantly grabbing headlines with their incessant attacks on Israel. In the aftermath of Israel's incredible victory in the Six-Day War of 1967, the Palestinians realized they needed to take charge of their own cause and began targeting Israel directly. After having been kicked out of Jordan, the Palestinian Liberation Organisation, or the PLO, established their new base in southern Lebanon. As Lebanon soon became embroiled in a civil war, the PLO used the war-torn country as a base from which they could attack Israeli interests abroad as well as northern Israel. Under the hawkish leadership of Prime Minister Menachim Begin, Israel responded to the Palestinian threat from within Lebanon in a very heavy-handed manner, twice invading the country within a span of 4 years. The 1978 operation was limited and short-lived, but in 1982, however, Israel sought to eradicate the Palestinian threat to their northern territories once and for all. In a strange twist, they actually achieved this, but soon after, the Palestinians were replaced by Hezbollah, who have targeted northern Israel ever since. In 1947, the newly established United Nations decided that British-controlled Mandatory Palestine would be split into 2 states, an Arab and a Jewish one. One of the many side effects of this was the Nakba, whereby over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs were expelled or forced to flee from their homes by the Israeli military. Most settled as refugees in neighboring Arab countries, over 100,000 of these moving to Lebanon. As a result of the sectarian nature of Lebanon's political system, the refugees were not provided the same rights as Lebanese citizens for fear of destabilizing the country's confessional balance. Up until 1967, the Palestinian cause was taken up by powerful Arab states like Egypt and Syria, but their horrendous showing in the Six-Day War that year made Palestinians realize they needed to take their destiny into their own hands. Under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the PLO took the mantle of representing their own cause by launching a war of national liberation against Israel. From their base in Jordan, PLO Fedayeen guerrillas would coordinate attacks into Israel. As a result, in March 1968, the Israelis attacked the PLO headquarters at Karameh on the Jordanian-Israeli border. The Israelis soon withdrew, sending the Arab world into a frenzy and galvanizing Palestinians, with recruitment skyrocketing for the various Palestinian militant groups. Unfortunately for King Hussein of Jordan, this allowed the PLO to become significantly more powerful, to the point where the organization started to challenge the Jordanian government for authority. So in September 1970, King Hussein launched an all-out attack on the PLO to reassert full control over his state. Quickly defeating the militants, Jordan allowed the Fedayeen to relocate to Lebanon. Unbeknownst to anyone then, the events of Black September, as they came to be known, would pave the way for 2 separate Israeli invasions of Lebanon over the next decade or so. By the early 1970s, Lebanon itself was experiencing serious instability. The country has had a rich history of ethnic and religious diversity, so under the French mandate, its political system was configured in a way to reflect this diversity. But as a result of demographic changes, as well as political corruption and foreign interference, the different religious groups were on the precipice of war by the mid-1970s. The introduction of a politicized and militarized faction like the PLO further undermined the delicate balance. In 1975, the Lebanese Civil War broke out, going on to become one of the deadliest and most confusing conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history, with numerous belligerents who were organized sometimes amongst religious lines and other times ideologically. These lines of division were not always static, so groups often changed allegiances depending on the circumstances, with religious and ideological brethren turning on one another. Whilst being simultaneously engaged in attacking the Maronite-led right-wing Lebanese front, the PLO had replicated in Lebanon what they had done in Jordan by establishing a quasi-state in South Lebanon, which they subsequently used to launch attacks on northern Israel. Of course, the Israelis retaliated, launching aerial attacks on Palestinian refugee camps and towns in southern Lebanon. On March 11, 1978, the leading group within the PLO, Yasser Arafat's Fatah, attacked the Israeli city of Haifa, hijacking buses and opening fire on civilians. The Coastal Road massacre would remain one of the most successful PLO attacks on Israeli soil. Just 3 days later, Israel launched Operation Litani, with the goal of pushing the PLO away from the Lebanese-Israeli border. The operation was restricted to Lebanese territory south of the Litani River and began with aerial and naval bombardment before 25,000 Israeli troops entered South Lebanon. The Israeli tactic of launching an all-out attack on PLO positions was stifled by the Palestinian militants not being interested in engaging, simply retreating further north. As a result, most of the 1,000 to 2,000 casualties from the week-long conflict were civilians, both Palestinian and Lebanese. The most damaging aspect of the campaign was that it displaced up to 250,000 people internally. After finding out that Israel had been giving American weapons to the South Lebanon Army, a Christian-dominated partisan of the Civil War, President Jimmy Carter of the USA put pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Menachim Begin to bring the conflict to an end or face the prospect of American military aid being cut off. By March 28th, both the Israelis and PLO had accepted the UN-sponsored ceasefire, with the UN interim force being sent to South Lebanon to confirm that the ceasefire was being respected by both sides. Even though Israel soon withdrew, it continued to supply and train the SLA. This was done with the strategic aim of turning South Lebanon into some sort of a security zone for Israel. Prime Minister Begin, despite winning the Nobel Prize for Peace because of his historic peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, was very hawkish in his temperament. Even prior to the establishment of Israel, Begin had been a leader of the Irgun, a Jewish paramilitary organization that was designated by the UN and British as a terrorist organization. Begin's aggressiveness was shared by many prominent figures in his government, Defense Minister Ariel Sharon and Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces Raphael Eitan being key examples. Subsequently, Prime Minister Begin offered support to the main Christian group, the Maronite Phalange Party, otherwise known as Kataib. Bashir Gemayel, the young and charismatic leader of Kataib, had made his dislike for the PLO and Palestinian refugees inside of his country well known. So despite the presence of UN forces, Israel provided aerial support for their Christian allies, whilst Palestinian attacks were reduced but still persisted. In July 1981, Philip Habib, the American Special Envoy to the Middle East and himself originally of Lebanese descent, carved out a back-channel ceasefire between the PLO and Israel, which brought a short-lived period of calm. At the time, the Palestinian Resistance Movement was extremely prolific in its activity, going after Israeli targets not only within Israel, but also globally. Much to the displeasure of Prime Minister Begin and his hawkish advisors, the 1981 ceasefire did not take into account Palestinian attacks outside of Lebanon. Begin was on the warpath, seeking a conclusive confrontation that could result in the neutralization of the almost constant Palestinian attacks on Israel, both at home and abroad. Yasser Arafat, on the other hand, wanted the complete opposite. He pressured the PLO into maintaining the ceasefire. His work was cut out for him because he did not have complete control over all the Palestinian groups, such as the PFLP. This history is a reminder of what we've lived through the past year, that conflict in the Middle East can be far-reaching, with immediate and global consequences on our lives. The World Bank just warned that spreading conflict in the Middle East would impact the global economy, and just a few days ago, oil markets were petrified by growing tensions in Iran. That's why, just a few months ago, Bank of America reported over 80% of young wealthy investors are looking to diversify into fine art as part of their overall portfolio strategy. Masterworks, the sponsor of this video, is making those same assets investable. Their art investing platform has distributed back a total of over $60 million in investor proceeds across 23 exits. Right now, low prices in the art market are demonstrating a rare entry opportunity, and even still, Masterworks posted another profitable return from selling a Basquiat painting for $8 million recently. Masterworks handles all the legwork, authentication and acquisition, then storage and sale. All you do is invest in a piece of artwork you like. Once the painting is sold, potential net proceeds from the sale get distributed to the investors. As a Hikmah History viewer, you can start investing right away by using the QR code on the screen or by going to masterworks.com/Hikmah History. It's important to note that past sales and previous offerings are not indicative of future results. Investing always involves risks. For disclosures, go to masterworks.com/CD. Back to the video we go. On June 3rd, 1982, Begin found the excuse he was looking for. The Israeli ambassador to Britain, Shlomo Argov, was shot in the head in London by militants associated with the Abu Nidal organization. This radical Palestinian militant group was not part of the PLO, maintaining an antagonistic attitude towards what they perceived to be Yasser Arafat's soft and permissive stance against Israel. The PLO quickly denied involvement in the attack, but Begin did not care for the nuance and complexities within the Palestinian Resistance Movement. 3 days later, 60,000 Israeli troops launched a three-pronged invasion of Lebanon. One was to go straight towards Beirut, the second was to gain control over the Beirut-Damascus highway, whilst the third moved in the direction of the Bekaa Valley in the east, where Syrian power within Lebanon was concentrated. Initially, the Syrians put up a decent effort, but by late June, the Israeli forces were pushing deep into the Bekaa Valley and had largely managed to shake off Syrian dominance over the Beirut-Damascus highway, as they demonstrated the superiority of their military technology against the Soviet-supplied weaponry of Syria. The Israelis had already pushed towards the outskirts of Beirut by June 14th. The city would remain under siege for the next 7 weeks as Israel bombarded it via land, sea and air, even launching carpet bombing operations. Ariel Sharon and Rafael Eitan sought to initiate a ground invasion of West Beirut, where the PLO was holed up. But this was vehemently pushed back against by other members of the Israeli government who feared the heavy loss of Israeli life that would have inevitably come with the street-to-street urban warfare. In addition, Israel was pressured by American President Ronald Reagan to not launch the assault, having already condemned their bombardment of the city. The siege lasted until late August, when a UN-backed deal allowed around 15,000 PLO fighters to evacuate Beirut for other Arab countries such as Tunisia. An international peacekeeping force, the MNF, or the Multinational Force, was brought in to ensure a smooth exit for the Palestinians and eventually Israel too. Philip Habib had already given assurances to the PLO fighters that they need not worry about the well-being of their fellow Palestinians in the refugee camps. Within 3 weeks of their departure, the PLO's worst fears came to fruition. Bashir Gemayel had been elected as the next president of Lebanon in late August, but he would never hold office as he was assassinated on September 14th. The perpetrator, Habib Shartouni, a member of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, stated his motivation was Gemayel's alignment with Israel, which he, like many in Lebanon and the wider Arab world, deemed an act of betrayal. Nonetheless, Lebanese Maronites were furious over their leader's murder. So just 2 days later, a force of a few hundred Kataib fighters were allowed entry by the IDF into Sabra and Shatila, a neighborhood and a refugee camp respectively in southern Lebanon that was inhabited mainly by Palestinians and Shias. From September 16th to 18th, the Phalangists moved through Sabra and Shatila, raping and murdering indiscriminately. All the while, the IDF stood by the exits of both neighborhoods and did nothing to intervene despite being fully aware of the massacres taking place. In fact, they even fired flares into the night sky so as to illuminate the way for the Maronites who were hell-bent on revenge. In total, up to 3,500 civilians were massacred in an event that shocked the world. The massacre brought international condemnation for Israel and the Phalangists. Domestically within Israel, the Kayhan Commission was set up to investigate the causes, eventually criticizing the IDF for their own quote-unquote indirect responsibility in the massacre. Defense Minister Ariel Sharon, known as the Butcher of Beirut amongst Arabs, came under pronounced criticism and soon after resigned, although he would go on to become Israeli Prime Minister in 2001. Prime Minister Menachim Begin would also resign in 1983. As for the Israeli forces in Lebanon, they pulled out of Beirut by the end of September 1982. By June 1985, they had moved out of the Bekaa Valley and major southern cities like Sidon to the security zone they had drawn up in southern Lebanon. The MNF stayed in Lebanon until 1984, when they were forced out as a result of major attacks against them and the Lebanese civil war heating up again. Very crucially, in 1983, a US-sponsored agreement was signed between Israel and Lebanon that agreed to normalize relations between the two countries. The new Lebanese president, Bashir's brother Amin, sought to make his country the second Arab state to recognize Israel, after Anwar Sadat's Egypt 4 years prior. But the May 17th agreement met strong opposition from Lebanese society as well as the wider Arab world. Therefore, it was repudiated by the Lebanese government. More long-term, with the PLO withdrawing from southern Lebanon, this opened the way for new forces to take their place. It was precisely this context that gave rise to Hezbollah, the militant Shia group which has proven a constant thorn in the side of Israel ever since. It was really between Israel's invasion in 1982 and their withdrawal to the security zone in the south of Lebanon in 1985 that Hezbollah metamorphosized. In fact, when Israel finally withdrew from southern Lebanon in the year 2000, it was as a result of a 15-year-long guerrilla warfare campaign by Hezbollah. The two sides remain locked in a war as we speak, 42 years after Israel invaded war-torn Lebanon.
Thank you guys for watching, and a special thank you goes out to my Patreons for continuing to support me financially. If you want to do so, click the link in the end screen or in the description to this video, and I would appreciate it a lot. Whatever contribution you can make, that would be awesome. Until next time, peace.